Okay, so we're going to be looking at the emotional weather this morning in a bit more detail. So let's start with a resourcing practice, just for 2 or 3 minutes. So this is Rick Hansen, the longtime meditator and psychologist, possibly neuroscientist as well. Anyway, so 3 stages. So in the first, you can close your eyes or look away from the screen, whichever suits you. So in the first stage, just very simply connecting with calm strength. Calm strength. So there might be an image that comes to you. Maybe a tree with its roots in the ground. Or the Buddha in earth-touching mudra. Whatever it is, something that conveys and allows you to feel into those qualities. Calm strength. And the second stage, connecting with okay now, being okay now. There might be many things that are happening in your life or around you, but right now in this moment, connecting with something that's okay in your own being. And now in the third stage, connecting with flow of love and connection. And those can be very small moments, from passing a neighbor in a street and there's an acknowledgement of each other, or a little interaction in a shop, meeting a dog and owner on a walk. So it can be these really small but significant connections, or it can be connections in your mind with those that you have a really substantial relationship with. So the whole gamut. Parents, children, close friends. Just taking in whoever comes to mind. Connecting with that flow of love and connection between you. Many different ways. An offering of love and connection from you, and a receiving of love and connection. And at some point, perhaps there isn't that much of a difference between the giving and receiving. And then bringing the practice to a close, coming back to the screen. Should include our furry friends in that flow of love and connection. It is very nice getting a glimpse into people's lives with the moment I can see Patricia's cat sitting, looking at you, Patricia, rather than looking at the screen, which is as it should be. So had to scale down my intentions this morning. They're a little bit ambitious. I want to talk about, in a way, the states of mind that are the cause of a lot of our suffering. And it's probably not an accident that this is the largest chapter in my book, chapter 5. It's mammoth. And that's because there's so much to say, isn't there? So much to say about dukkha and the causes of dukkha and the way from dukkha. So I had to rein myself in a little bit this morning and say some of the material is for Uncontrived Mindfulness Part 2. So I want to start just with a little quote from Steve Armstrong. Many of you will have heard this before. He's an American Dharma teacher. He says, "Your mind is a dangerous place, or your mind is a dangerous neighborhood. Don't go there alone. Take mindfulness with you." So your mind is a dangerous neighborhood. Don't go there alone. Take mindfulness with you. So this points to mindfulness as with its protective factor for the mind. It sort of protects us from danger. And the danger in this instance is what causes us suffering, what causes our own suffering, and where we're the cause of others' suffering. And what causes us suffering is mostly happening within our own minds, our emotions, our thoughts, and our ideas, especially ideas that argue with the reality of what's happening. This shouldn't be happening, something else should be happening, I want this to be happening, I don't want this, if only this was happening. Could probably fill a page of the ideas that the mind has that basically argue with reality, don't accept what's happening. So it's the one way of talking about. We've been talking about klesha. Can also talk about afflictive emotions, or very simply talk about the poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion, or greed, aversion, and ignorance, craving, aversion, and ignorance. Some in that realm. And it's easy to feel we can't be aware of very strong emotions. And there might even be some views around that, oh, this just needs to be felt. Yeah, emotions do need to be felt fully, but actually to feel them fully, we can feel them in awareness, feel them with mindfulness. So there's a knowing that sadness is happening. There's a knowing that disappointment is happening. And perhaps that knowing includes some degree of knowing the degree of identification with what's happening. Not only is disappointment happening, but knowing the flavor of that disappointment, perhaps there's some anger that this is happening, some sadness that this is happening, and also that view of this shouldn't be happening. So we can know in the round, if you like, when mindfulness and right view are present. We've got more to go on. So the place of acceptance and allowing are crucial when we're working with being present to strong emotions, to one manifestation or another of the poisons. So we may not be able to change the experience of grief or anger, depression or sadness, and that's not what we're trying to do, and not trying to change the experience, at least not directly. And the best we might be able to do is just show up, just be present to what's happening. So mindfulness can help us bear with really sort of big feelings or emotions. Mindfulness can help us not either suppress what's happening, so we don't feel it clearly. The suppressing involves the not wanting it to be there, pushing away, but also not, indulging is the word, which is not always the right word, but we can feed strong emotions, and then we get lost in them, we get overwhelmed. The mind gets overwhelmed by them. But acceptance and this sense of allowing within the mindfulness allows us to, in a way, recognize that these types of feelings and emotions are just part of the human condition, part of being human. Dukkha, not a mistake. So that allowing mudra, I think, is a deeply, deeply kind one. And another crucial part of all this, excuse me, a bit close to my radiator, is not judging. Not judging is huge in this. Allowing that sort of tender, sensitive quality to acceptance. This is what's here. This is okay. This is how it is in this moment. And how is that? Being curious about how that is. How is disappointment or sadness felt in the body, in the mind? And when there's judging, it's much harder for that sense of interest or curiosity to be there. And it goes the other way when there's some degree of interest in the judging mind. What's the judging mind like? We may feel we know it very well, that it's a frequent visitor, but actually, what's it like just when we turn and face it? Yeah, without any assumptions, without all the history, but just in the moment. What's it like? What's the judging mind like? How does it think? What sort of thoughts does it throw up? So a strong part of the practice is to recognize judging mind from the perspective of mindfulness. The nature of judging is different to the nature of awareness. That it's not in the nature of mindfulness to judge. It has a benign, open quality that allows us to recognize that judging is happening in the mind. And so it can be very helpful in facilitating us not automatically believing what the judgment voice is saying. So Bhante talks, I think it's in Living with Awareness, about with mindfulness, we're working on the bedrock of the mind. Could also say we're working at the coal face of our being. So it's challenging. It's a challenging to look at things that often we're more likely to want to sort of skirt around. Oh yes, there's that. Okay, what's it like? What's these sort of sometimes quite big, scary mind states. So what are they like? To simply be present to, resting back in awareness. I think perhaps we don't often bear with our dukkha head on. Certainly my own experience, I'm much more likely, or certainly have been much more likely to either suppress it or get very sort of involved with it, get really sort of merged and identified with it. So it's a new stance, if you like. It's a new way of being, a new relationship to experience, to say, okay, that whatever's happening can happen. Can I be with it? Can I be aware of it? Uttejaniya has this very nice little phrase. He's saying, as long as awareness and right view are there, he said, anything can be happening. The rest of the minds, he's talking about the mind states, the rest of the minds, they can do what they want. He says it's enough to be able to observe the storm. So I quite like the idea of these little boats on this wild sea, these boats of frustration or jealousy or depression or whatever, and if we're able to observe the storm from this perspective that's not of the same nature as the stormy seas, it has a much calmer perspective, then that's okay. Yeah, but that takes practice, because usually mixing my metaphors now, but the dukkha of the storm, if you like, is we're looking through that lens of frustration or aversion, whatever it is. What we're wanting to do is rather than look through the lens of dukkha, be able to look directly at the dukkha, but from this perspective of mindfulness. So have a sort of analogy, I suppose it is, and it's connected with David Attenborough, who I don't think I've mentioned on this particular retreat. Sometimes mention him just in various contexts, but his role as a naturalist, if you like, and the place that of looking at experience within its natural environment. But anyway, there's the top 10 David Attenborough little clips on YouTube, and one of them is David meeting the gorillas. So I don't know, probably some of you have seen this particular clip, maybe in its original form as part of one of his series. Anyway, he does this quite risky shoot somewhere in Africa, where he really wants to sort of meet the gorillas. That's one of the few sort of wild, well, I think they're in a reserve, but anyway, it's quite a risky thing to do. They get a couple of photographers in quite discreetly, and then David Attenborough goes sort of crawling in through this long grass where they can't see the gorillas, but they know that they're there. A whole sort of troop of them are there. So he sort of mimics their way of moving. He's on all fours. He's sort of going in there. Nobody quite knows what's going to happen, but they know with a single swipe, he could be very badly injured or killed. But he's up for it. So he goes in there and makes himself at home in the long grass. And gradually these gorillas come out, and they're very curious about him. They're huge. They're really huge. And they start, as they get more relaxed around him, they start sort of touching him. They start eventually grooming him, looking for fleas in his hair and doing various touching him. And he's, you can see on his face, he's absolutely thrilled with this. It's one of the sort of really big moments in his life to get this close, to be in this sort of relationship. So even though it is a very dangerous situation, actually, there's something about his attitude of openness, sense of wonder, willingness to be present. That, I suppose for me, the analogy is around our big, scary mind states. Perhaps we can have gorilla-like mind states, and a fear or doubt or judgments or opening to things like vulnerability. But actually, there's if we can have a bit of that David Attenborough attitude of curiosity and openness to what's happening, then we can come into a new relationship with new territory, if you like. When we see things in a different way, we can see that something that we've experienced maybe for decades, but you see it without identification, it feels completely different. There's a freedom in that. So this is not to deny the difficulty or the perhaps the fear, or we feel the danger of overwhelm from some of our mind states, whether they're the more the sort of depressive end or the more high energy end. But I think one of the benefits in this practice is of learning not to be afraid of our own minds. It's like whatever happens over time, we can learn to be with things without these twin poles falling into or pushing away from, indulging or suppressing. Pema Chodron talks about this being the place where the warrior learns compassion. When we see it's not a mistake that these emotions arise, but an opportunity to, in a way, learn more about what it is to be a human being. And that naturally increases our ability to see other people in that way, other people's mistakes, other people's annoying habits, actually human beings doing the best that we can. So when we are able to observe with mindfulness and right view, what happens? I said warrior, not a worrier. Is that clear enough? Warrior, W-A. That's another way of looking at it, though, isn't it? Where the warrior learns compassion. Quite like that. It's quite tender, isn't it? Yeah. Well, they do both fit. Yeah, lovely. Okay, so what this perspective says very strongly is that despite talking about warriors, the defilements, the klesha are not the enemy. They're not something that we need to sort of pit ourselves against. They're just doing their job, actually. You could see it like that. Aversion, I think I said the other day, has this sort of fiery, destructive quality. That's its nature. Craving has this stickiness and this sort of longing quality of wanting, and its nature is to want, just like thinking's nature is to think. So that perspective can help us not pit ourselves against them. But when we're able to observe with mindfulness and right view, what may well happen is that there's some sort of decrease in the intensity of the emotion. That may not happen straight away. You may find that that doesn't happen at all, but that might be because perhaps the mindfulness isn't very strong at that point. Perhaps the mindfulness is a bit too, or perhaps the mind state is a bit too sort of big or strong for the mindfulness in that moment. So we might need to resource the mindfulness a little bit more by working with a neutral object. But often there will be a decrease in the intensity, you get less involved, and you see a bit more objectively. This is aversion in the mind. This is what it's like. And implicit in that perspective is it's like it's not the whole of my experience. There's an ability to notice it, to observe it. Sometimes I've had this experience quite often, where the if you like, the what's being observed will pop like a bubble in the mind, because it's being seen for what it is, because it's being seen more objectively. I remember once I was doing walking meditation in the States, and I was doing it quite late at night, and I had a worry on my mind, and it was around a job that I was doing, and was somebody who I didn't get on with that well in the job. I was a bit scared of her, and she was in a sort of managerial role to me, relationship to me, and I got it into my head that that I was going to have to leave the job because of her, and I just got a whole sort of scenario going while I was walking. And I got to the point, I clearly wasn't that aware. I was trying to be with it, but I was quite identified. And I got to the point where I was almost in tears while walking, because of what the mind was creating, what it was producing, and the feelings that were arising in relation to these thoughts. There were some thoughts around reputation. I thought, people will think badly of me, whatever it was. And I suddenly saw, there was a moment of clarity of right view and mindfulness thinking. And I, in a way, could see the sort of concocting and construing that had been going on, and the fantasy of it, really. And it did just pop. It just popped. And that was it. Just carried on walking. So sometimes it can happen quite dramatically, if you like, this sort of dispelling of the delusion around the mind state. And at other times it happens quite slowly. Maybe you just need to keep reminding the mind, this is what's happening. This is sadness in the mind. This is disappointment in the mind. And what else is happening? What else? Oh, there's walking going on, there's sitting going on, there's seeing happening, there's hearing happening. So staying based in the present moment and not getting too focused on this secondary sort of reality of emotions and story that are being we're getting caught up with. And that can feel quite counterintuitive, to come back to the sense of what else is happening, seeing sensations, because there's a big pull. I think Mokshika said it a couple of days ago. There's a big pull towards the strongest things that are happening in our experience. The drama. Charlotte Yoka Beck, the Zen teacher, talks about how we can find sitting practice, particularly Zazen, she's talking about it, we can find it quite unsatisfying because there's very little drama. But she says after a while you get the taste for, if you like, the subtleties of the peaceful mind, or the mind that's simply open and aware, has this benign quality to it, or impartial quality, or sort of kindly spaciousness. It's not big, it's not dramatic, but once we get a taste for it, then, if you like, the wisdom in the mind can quickly realize that this is a lot less suffering than the sort of ups and downs, the highs and lows of our stories and our drama. Sometimes, again, in my own experience, there have been times with watching very strong emotion, and just being able to have a toehold with awareness, keeping recognized that this is aversion happening in the mind. Seeing the thoughts that spin off, and seeing how often those thoughts increase the aversion, like fireworks. I remember particular experiences where it's just like fireworks in the mind. Particular thoughts would just inflame the feelings, and really interesting to see that relationship. The experience was painful, but there was something in the mind that was able to be interested as well. Oh wow, that's what aversion is like. It's like throwing petrol bombs. These particular thoughts are like chucking a petrol bomb into my experience, and it whoosh, up it goes. But keeping going by, in a way, trusting awareness, trusting right view is enough. Over the time, I started seeing the quality of the thoughts change in this particular example. So rather than them being really inflammatory, or the response to particular, that sort of inflammatory sort of story and feeling, it started to calm down, and I started to have the sort of thoughts that were much more exploratory and considered, and I didn't try and have those thoughts. It was more that they emerged from staying with the process. Sort of thoughts like, well, maybe when she said this, she meant this, so in a way, the mind coming to a calmer sort of interpretation of what had been said, rather than one that had really sort of inflamed the mind. And over time so it's not neat, it's not sort of clean process necessarily, and in a way that's part of it. It's being willing to be with the mind that is messy at times. But over time, through understanding, the mind starts to recognize which states lead to suffering, and which lead to freedom from suffering, which lead to more liberated mind states, and becomes more able to make those choices, not in a conscious way, necessarily, but just finding that those more sort of skillful choices have been made. If there's wisdom in the mind, it's always going to choose freedom. It's always going to choose liberation, if you like. So that's a way of recognizing that sort of wisdom quality in the mind. It sees things from a slightly new perspective, not the habitual perspective, which often we just go round the wheel of suffering. So I want to say just a little bit about each of craving and aversion, and how we might sort of they might manifest in practice, particularly. So aversion first. So the Pali word is dosa. The Sanskrit is dvesa, D-V-E-S-A, but dosa, like masala dosa, I think. So dosa is the Pali. So this includes all sorts of things, lovely things like irritation, grumpiness, fault-finding mind, resentment, resistance, anger, tight, contracted, closed mind. Sometimes the not bothering mind, the can't be bothered mind, there's a bit of a pushing away, a bit of aversiveness. So this is often the easiest poison for us to recognize in the mind, partly because we suffer, and then we pay attention to to why we're suffering. So we notice it. Yeah, there's also a secondary in the early Buddhist tradition. Sort of there's not dosa is two groups. So there's that more active group, and then there's the stuff like fear and sadness and disappointment. They're perhaps a bit less obvious, but there's still a sense of arguing with what's happening, arguing with reality. So in meditation, you might recognize things like frustration, impatience, seeing what's wrong with practice, what's not good enough, rather than what is there. So not enough samadhi, not enough peacefulness. So judging and comparing come into the aversive mind, any sort of slight complaint. Working to correct or interfere with what's happening in the mind can sometimes have that aversive quality too. So any form of not wanting. So we learn to recognize these manifestations of dosa, of ill will, aversion in the mind. We can notice what's feeding them. So just to say here that I'm not when I use the word investigation, it's much more like Dharma Vichaya, the investigation of phenomena. So it's investigation through observation. It's not a thinking about what's happening. It's a really, in a way, having a mind that is curious and open to seeing what's happening. That's the type of noticing that we're doing. It's not it's not so active, but the curiosity enables more to be learned. So is it certain thoughts that are inflaming the mind? Is there a trigger? Is there an unpleasant memory or a particular historical thought or sound? Any of the senses, if you like, can condition unpleasant or not wanting responses in the mind. And it's really important that we don't take that all personally. It's just how the mind works. It's how all minds work, to the degree that we're operating under the lens of the poisons rather than under the influence of wisdom. So we're looking to grow more moments of freedom from klesha and to grow more moments of awareness and wisdom in the mind. But one of the ways that we do it is through recognizing what's actually happening and becoming a bit more free through the it might feel like, oh God, I'm worse than I thought I was because I've got so much aversion in the mind. But actually, it's a good sign if you are able to recognize all these manifestations at an earlier stage. Often with the mindfulness, we recognize them before they really get going. Okay, just clock them. So we're looking to understand how aversion's working in the mind, see the effect that it has on the body, on the heart. Again, like the naturalist studying, but we're a naturalist studying the mind in its natural environment. We're not trying to make it different, but actually just to see how it is, how the normal everyday mind is, but seeing it from a perspective that is not of the everyday quality. It has something that's really, really helpful to our spiritual aspirations because we're working with the Dharma perspective and awareness. Okay, so a little bit, that's just a whistle stop tour of aversion. I'm sure you're really familiar with lots of the manifestations anyway. So craving, I have a little quote here from my fundraising days, which I really like, and this is by someone called Jacob Needleman. And he says, greed is inevitable in the absence of an inner aim. Greed is inevitable in the absence of an inner aim. So without that inner aim, and I think I equate that inner aim with right view, with a Dharma perspective, with the motivation to practice the spiritual life. That's our inner aim, if you like. But without that, then all we're left with is self-referencing, what works for me and those that I sort of include in my me circle. So right view is that inner direction which is more in line with reality, not driven by the poisons. So how does it show up? Well, wanting, Lobha. Lobha is the Pali, and the Sanskrit is the same, Lobha. I have a very little aside here, but a very memorable moment on a retreat with quite an extrovert Italian friend of mine on a retreat in Slovakia, and we were in a building that had about three stories and the big staircase going up. So this atrium at the bottom. We were standing by the notice board, and she suddenly burst into song and led us in song. We were talking about practice, and the song was "Whatever Lobha wants, Lobha gets." So this is the raison d'etre of Lobha, of wanting, is more wanting. I won't actually sing it, but you can imagine how it was. It wasn't a silent retreat. It was a nearly silent retreat, but so we were just about in bounds. So longing, wishing, hoping. Hoping is really interesting. An enchantment with the desired object. This is how Subhuti talks about it. And an over-eagerness in the mind. I think here there's a balance between interest and curiosity, and when that becomes very strong, it can tip into this eagerness, which has more the flavor of wanting something than simply just being interested in what's actually happening. So we can get the over eagerness can have within it some sort of agenda. Seeking more, wallowing, and Bhante talks about hankering, which is a good old-fashioned Bhante word, but I like it. Hankering after something. In meditation, I think often it can manifest as impatience. So I think impatience works for craving and aversion. Comparing mind also, striving, dissatisfaction, and expectations. I think perhaps expectations are the thing that can most influence our and be hardest to see, actually seeing the expectations, because we can feel like they're reasonable. It's reasonable to have these expectations, or it's part of having an eye on where I'm going in practice, is to have expectations. One perspective that I find helpful is to distinguish between, if you like, a desire to practice and a desire for results. And I think expectations often have that desire for a particular result, rather than just being willing to practice the best we can, to set up the conditions in the mind, not worry too much about the results. Again, there's that little saying of Analios, which I haven't yet found in my notes, about balancing working with what's happening while having a sense of the goal, but not being preoccupied with the goal. So I think there's a big area around pleasure, which I'm just going to give about a minute to, I'm afraid. Might touch it again this afternoon. But pleasure's important to the mind, and it's important in practice. It will arise quite naturally, and it's particularly in practice, it's good to notice that. And outside of practice, it can really influence our choices, or in our outside of formal practice, in our daily life. But back to that little quote by Jacob Needleman about greed being inevitable in the absence of an inner aim. How much do we pursue pleasure? It's fine for it to arise, but in a way, how much do we make it our guiding principle? This is why I want to do something, because it will be pleasurable. If we make it our guiding sort of principle or orientation, then we don't have right view as our guiding principle or orientation. What's best? What's best in overall in practice? And of course, because we're human, because we're training, because we have plenty of greed, hatred, and delusion, we do make pleasure our guiding principle at times. I certainly do. Vajradevi can testament to that. And we can, in a way, use that as a call to right view. Am I, is this just about pursuing pleasure? Or is there something else? What's my motivation here? Necessary or not, again. So yeah, patience is really important. I've talked about impatience a couple of times, but one of the if we are able to connect with patience, and sometimes I find just dropping it into my mind will be enough. Patience, there's an absence of craving, a willingness to, yeah, again, to be with what's happening. It's one of the sort of contributing factors in mindfulness. The craving is actually a bit more difficult to see, as I imagine many of you are aware of. It feels like it's full of promise, full of potential, the things that we want, the things, that desire to go after something, however small, whether it's a second bit of cake, or a fancy new car, whatever it is. It has this. Lobha has this capacity to make things glow. There's a seductiveness to it. Shines up the pleasant and ignores the unpleasant. So it doesn't take a balanced view, which is fair enough from its own terms, because it's just wants us to do the wanting. Subhuti says, you take an object, you blow its pleasurable aspects out of proportion, forget about its painful downside. You think that by having the object, you will secure your ego identity. By attaching yourself to the object, you think you will enhance your ego identity and you'll be happy, solid, and secure. This is craving. So it's really a mistaken view, a wrong view of how to be happy, how to be secure. It's craving's view that to get what we want, or to get sort of happiness and security, we need to follow our wants, what we want. Okay, so that's all I'll say for now. That's plenty. I'm just going to have a look at what Samashuri's written in the chat, and if there are any comments or questions. Okay, so you're saying interesting that the kindly spacious awareness we're aiming for is pleasurable too. Yeah, and the Buddha talked about how important it is that we have pleasure in our spiritual lives, that we have the equivalent. Otherwise, he said, we don't really stand a chance. If the spiritual life isn't pleasurable, and we're just leaving behind pleasure from sense experiences. So yeah, really important to notice. Well, in this practice, there's less of the sort of intense pleasures from concentration, samadhi, jhana. There's more, I'd say, probably a bit subtler, the pleasures of the present moment, the pleasures of wisdom, actually, the pleasures of seeing more clearly what's happening. So some sort of satisfaction in the mind. And also the pleasure of peacefulness. Yeah. A bit underrated maybe, but that lack of drama that Charlotte Yokobeck was talking about, there's a peacefulness in the mind. And yeah, as Riju Muni is saying, the distinction between worldly pleasures, the pleasures that come from sense experience, and the unworldly pleasure that comes from practice. So anyone with any thoughts or comments? Okay, just have to read this one. Sorry, I haven't quite got my head around the question in the chat. If you don't mind, I might come back to that in a little bit when I've been able to take it in a bit more. Let's go with Suzanne, which do you prefer?
Suze is good. Thank you. Lovely talk. I think it's really interesting stuff. I just want to make a comment and maybe a bit of a question as well. When you were talking about aversion and emotions and anger, I recall having an instance some time ago where I got very angry, and I think I've been conditioned not to actually show a lot of anger or express it. So, and I found myself in this place where I was so enraged, and it was uncontrollable. I found it very difficult. And after you talking and stuff, I'm thinking that maybe I was making it worse because I was not wanting it to be there. I'd had, things were going well, and suddenly, not suddenly, but this had come up, and it felt like it was so out of control, and I so didn't want it. And it was really like, it kind of like you said with the fireworks, me not wanting it was actually making it bigger. Because when you were talking about it, I was thinking, I can't imagine how I could look at this and actually think, be objective. But yeah, I wondered if you could say something about that when you're actually fighting it or feeling that you shouldn't really express it or whatever.
Yeah. I think, it's always important to set, talking around craving and aversion in the context of the precepts. So that's why we're trying not to, in a way, dump stuff on others. So how do we? There may be things we need to say, and how can we work with our own? We don't always have the luxury of this, but can we work with our own stuff so that we can then come to a point where we can say what we need to say? In the experience I was talking about, actually, I was on retreat, and I basically bought myself some time to I can't talk about this now with the person involved, and I just went and I sort of worked with with it in the way that I described. Sorry, I've slightly gone somewhere.
I think what I was trying to ask as well is the fact that, am I right in the fact that by trying to fight it, not wanting it, I'm actually making it bigger? Because I don't think I was aware of that. It was just like, I don't want this, and it was getting bigger and bigger. I don't think I was aware that me not wanting it was actually making it much more uncontrollable.
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yes, definitely. And I think it's really good to see that in experience, and just to see how what increases the suffering. That's part of the learning about dukkha, what increases suffering and what decreases suffering. And the mind that we bring to the experience will make a very big difference. So in that moment, perhaps there was nothing that you could have done. But another time, recognizing it, there's recognizing the aversion to the experience, and having a sort of kindly, spacious response. Okay, so there's fighting in the mind, there's conflict in the mind. And sometimes just naming it like that will be enough to help something calm down a little bit. There's a recognition wherever we're able to acknowledge and recognize what's happening, even in quite general terms, it can be really helpful for the mind to calm down a bit. Okay, there's fighting, there's all this sort of tension and stuff. Okay, and there's the breath, and there's the sitting on the cushion, and there's birdsong or whatever it is. Taking those moments of spaciousness and helping build up awareness a little bit in those moments. Yeah, but really helpful if we can have our own process first before getting then into communication with someone.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you.
Ali, sounds like you're happy to leave it for now. Is that right? Yeah, okay, thank you. So Patricia.
Yeah, I had the same thing happen to me as Sue's actually the other day, about 2 days ago. It really welled up inside of me so much, and I was trying so hard to push it down, which kind of didn't work. And the other person was saying, well, you're taking this the wrong way. Well, it wasn't the wrong way, actually. It was the way that I was taking it. But it was just, I had to just sit there, be quiet. And I thought, I know what the best thing to do here is. The only thing I could think of at the time was just sit there and not say anything and just think, no, this will go away. It will disappear. Because if I say anything, it makes it worse. But it was completely the wrong view she had of something was passed along. And you know how things change when they get passed along. I just was so angry. I feel it now. And it's just really hard. And the only way is to sit there with it or to be quiet or to think, no, this is not the way I should be doing this. This is my old way. I mean, I was always brought up to fight my corner. So it's been quite hard to do a lot of this, and it's really helped me actually. And so I had a practice manager that used to have a go at me a lot, and other people as well, but really picked on me. And I learned quite a lot from her of actually sitting with it and not saying anything. And the more you say, the worse it gets. So you can't fight your corner sometimes. It's best to sit there. So so I was listening very much to what you just said then, so it was really helpful.
I suppose when we sit there, and in the moment I can really see that as the best thing to do, because you know that whatever comes out of your mouth is going to inflame the situation and it will feel worse. The benefits of being able to like you say, it's still there to some degree. You can feel it. Maybe in the meditation, sitting with it, to whatever degree that's there, watching from your own side in a way, the thoughts like, oh, when she says this, or she's wrong with it, see what happens in yourself, and in a way allow something to be learned about the nature of anger, the nature of nothing to do with the other person really, but the nature of our own. And then once things have calmed down, I think that the wisdom perspective is able to come in a bit more, and we think, well, what would be the skillful thing to say now? What? And maybe it's already there in your mind. Maybe there's already some sort of knowing or understanding from going through that process of what would be best to say now. And maybe that's nothing, depending on the person, depending on the situation. But I think once we're not speaking from aversion, then but allowing a bigger perspective to come in, then that things have a much better chance of going well.
Yeah, it's definitely got better. It's got better over the last couple of days, because at one time I'd have carried that on, but I haven't. It has gone, but it's just, Sue's talking about it just now, just brought it back a little bit, just so that I could explain to you. I needed to tell you how it kind of felt as well, and I understood exactly what she was saying. It's just really hard sometimes, and when someone won't leave it alone as well, they know it's getting you angry, so they carry on. So not say a word.
yeah, hard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Vajradevi, you've got you're going to tell me a question from the chat, did you say?
That's right, if we can.
Okay, yeah, let's have one more and we'll.
Yeah.
I thought you just said you were going to.
So can you mute?
Oh, sorry.
This is a question from chat. It's about the calming effect of right view on kleshas, on hindrances, in the presence of a traumatic response. So what happens when it feels difficult to do that calming with right view, when the autonomic nervous system is affected through trauma and the sympathetic nervous system response takes over? Do you stick with the grounding in the senses that you mentioned, or do you have anything else to say?
Yeah, I'll try and address that. I'm not a trauma professional, so I can't speak to that. But I have done I have done some work in this area myself, and also through a trauma sensitive mindfulness course, various things. I think with trauma nervous system responses, in a way you try it and see if the right view perspective is helpful. I know from my own experience that other things have helped too. I think we can draw on a number of almost different applications of right view. And I remember when I started doing some somatic experiencing, which involves quite a lot of orienting, external orienting that helps sort of calm the nervous system, various things. I felt like I was learning a right view of the nervous system, or a right view of the body almost. And so I think there are different ways that we can approach it, and I don't think that meditation necessarily is always enough. But I think there are certain I think different meditations have different types of meditation can have different strengths in relation to quite a dysregulated nervous system. I think a couple of the advantages in this practice, one is the receptive nature of the practice. It's very gentle, though precise in that way. But I think also that there's a lot of choice about where you pay attention. So if there's something, say like the paying attention to the body is quite triggering to the nervous system, then other ways are offered. You know, you can be with sounds, or you can be with seeing, or with the mind sense, or any or all of those. So I think there's a flexibility that can be helpful. But I think at a certain point, depending on how sort of triggered we get, then it's meditation is not the cure all for everything, and it might be necessary to in a way combine it with other things. Yeah, I think that's all I can think of at the moment. Yeah. It's different types of perspective, isn't it? That's where the different right views and the perspective of the nervous system. I think, having learned something of that myself, it's really helpful, because it takes out a certain any sense of, well, it takes out blame and shame from perhaps having a body that doesn't do what it feels like it's supposed to in meditation, or mind that feels like it doesn't quite do, like it's quite sort of activated or agitated. It doesn't lend itself to calm, or thoughts can sort of go dark quite quick. I think the nervous system perspective lens, it's very helpful in terms of added compassion and added understanding as to why our body and mind are responding as they do. It's a big area. It's a really big area. Okay, so let's have a break. Awkward timing. Let's come back of around 5 to 12 and we'll sit. So just time for a quick drink and see you then. Setting yourself up to sit or lie down or stand. So what we're doing in the practice over the week is just, if you like, just spotlighting particular aspects of experience, both experience in terms of objects arising in the body, heart, mind, and the experience of the mind that's aware. But as always, settling back, allowing awareness to come to you, not reaching out for it, pursuing it. Sitting with the intention to be present, and noticing where the attention goes. tuning into a quality of mindfulness that's allowing, attentive, with a kindly, broad spaciousness. And from that broad, open establishment of awareness, moment to moment, notice what the mind is knowing. Notice what attention is already knowing, and just bringing that into the light of awareness. And depending on what you notice, you may go with where the attention is going and letting awareness accompany that. Or you might use that faculty of discernment, of clearly knowing. Perhaps if there's a lot of thinking, to settle and ground within the sensations of the body, the breath body, or within sounds, just to allow the mindfulness to resource, to grow in strength. So you choose what's most helpful, what supports awareness, and what supports right view. Right view of objects, happenings, conditioned arisings. Noticing also feeling in the mind and in the body. So feeling around the heart area. Any feelings of pleasure, aliveness, or openness in the mind. Notice any moments of beauty in the mind. Whether skillful kusala qualities, recognizing where those qualities and the pleasure they bring support the mind, they support awareness. Notice any manifestations of Lobha or Dosa, craving or aversion in the mind. And seeing if it's possible to do this without judgment. Simply noticing conditioned arisings. The conditions have already been laid down for these particular manifestations of wanting or not wanting to arise. And how we respond next helps determine strengthening or weakening of craving and aversion in the future. Seeing if it's possible to be simply open and aware, willing to bear with whatever arises. And being curious about the presence or the absence of wanting, not wanting. What is the absence like in the mind and in the body? Absence of impatience or aversion, irritation. And noticing these feelings, mind states, arisings in the body, the mind. Noticing them from this resting back place. Inherently spacious. Of a different nature to the klesha mind state. See if right view can recognize any identification with the klesha. What this says about me. what sort of person I am. Simply an arising object in experience. Happening in this moment. Happening along with other sensations, movements of mind, sound sensations. All part of the process of a human life. Every now and again, also checking to see how you're relating to what's happening. If there's aversion or judgment in the mind, how are you relating to that? With aversion or resistance, or some degree of acceptance. This is simply what's happening in the moment. Remembering every now and again to simply relax the mind into the present moment. And this can help if we're starting to create a story around what's happening. Simply what's happening now in the body, in the mind, through the senses. hanging loose to the seductive nature of klesha mind. What else is the mind knowing? I'm just following instructions. Blame Vajradevi, I'm just doing what he tells me to do. Okay, so we have a few minutes. Just if anyone has anything they would like to say about that practice, just anything you noticed, perhaps you felt you were able to be aware in the moment. Dharmavantana.
I just noticed at one point that I just wanted to sing, now I walk in beauty, beauty is before me, beauty is behind me. And I was thinking that would be a brilliant, easy way to, like a little thing that you can take off the wall and sing when you're confronted with either, because I just noticed how immediately Preeti and then Sukha developed, and that sense of well-being, and it's to do, I felt, with that you go, beauty is below me, above, behind, and so it gives a sort of like, it's a bit like being in a nutshell, lovely, of being held in some way, particularly for, I was thinking, wobbly,
Yeah, that lovely. I like that sort of beauty as part of what helps support awareness, or holds awareness, which is allowing us to hold whatever is. Eric.
Yeah, I found with almost amusement that I was telling myself a story about a situation that didn't even exist, about how in a queue for petrol I would get angry at this driver doing this thing, and I haven't been in a queue for petrol. I don't intend to be. And normally in such a situation, I'd tell myself to not be daft and get rid of that. But I thought I'd sit with it and see if I could see what behind it. And the thought came to me is that I seem to have this desire to feel righteous indignation. And perhaps I'll give a little more thought to that. But just at the point where I was feeling this was a little bit out of hand, you talked about going back to the body, and that kind of disappeared. But yeah, but just waiting, as it were, taking that extra step of saying, well, why do I do that? It was interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, not immediately dismissing something, but especially if you're able to stay with awareness, just okay. Watching the mind sort of tell its story, really, and then getting the flavor of perhaps what's driving it. That sort of like desire for the righteous indignation to sort of have some sort of way of expressing itself. Yeah. Alan. Oh, you're muted, Alan.
Okay, I'd lost myself. Yeah, just enjoying the when you let something go that you're feeling a bit miffed about, just enjoying that feeling of contrasting lightness, and it was just so, letting the light in, and just leaving it alone.
Yeah, I
Not,
think that's, sorry, go on.
And not following it.
Yeah. So when I mean, another way of talking about that is when the sort of release of identification happens. This can just
Frozen.
Just having a bit of a drop out this end. I think we'll be back in a moment.
sorry, completely dropped out. We'll just hear from Sarvatanyana and then I'll just say a couple of things about later in the day. Yeah.
Oh, were you finished, Alan? Yeah. Yeah, I just I don't know. In my practice, the theme that awareness kept being drawn to was looking at helplessness and sort of the emotions in it or something. So it was a bit of a discovery in the mind, sort of that helplessness isn't the end point or something, or it's just an idea or something. Oh, I think Vajradevi is frozen again, isn't she? Anyway, that's what I've been exploring.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question for some reason. My computer's completely gone. Sorry, I'm just maybe aware that we should finish now. So sorry about that. So maybe just to say, I wanted to tell people that Sarvatanyana, your recording we recorded last night. This amazing body scan. Never done anything quite like it. So if you'd like to listen to that, it is posted up. So that will be the Tuesday evening recording if you wanted to listen to it again. And this afternoon, we'll be doing something around feeling and awareness metta practice. And then this evening, we'll do a Buddha puja, probably drawn from the Dhammapada. So hopefully see you then. Sorry about the technical failure.